Royal Guard sounds the alarm after Prince Louis comes crying. He did this to me. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers, always kept meticulously by the staff. The quiet routine of the royal household had always been predictable, but today was different. Something in the air felt uneasy, though no one could put their finger on it yet. Prince Louis, the youngest member of the royal family, had always been a lively, energetic boy. He was known for his mischievous smile, his loud laughter echoing through the halls of the palace. His energy was contagious, and he was often seen running through the palace corridors, playing with the family dogs or chasing after the staff. There was rarely a moment when he wasn't seen with a twinkle in his eyes, full of joy and enthusiasm. His family loved him dearly, and the people of the palace adored him too. However, today was different. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the royal grounds. The usual sounds of the palace, the faint clicking of high heels on marble floors, the muffled voices of servants, and the distant hum of palace staff moving about, were quieter today. The air felt still, almost too still, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. As the clock on the wall ticked steadily, no one knew that something unsettling was unfolding just a few corridors away. Prince Louis had been wandering the palace alone. He wasn't one for sitting still, especially not on such a beautiful day. But this time there was no laughter in his steps, no joyful shouts echoing off the walls. Instead, he seemed lost in thought, his steps unsteady, his gaze fixed ahead yet unseeing. There was a weight to his presence now, a heaviness that felt strange. The guards, who were used to his endless energy, noticed this odd change immediately. One royal guard, standing by his post near one of the grand hallways, saw the prince approaching. Normally, Louis would have dashed by, maybe stopped to wave or share a quick joke. But today he moved slowly, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had suddenly landed on him. The guard, trained to observe even the slightest changes in behavior, noticed how pale the prince's face was, how the light in his eyes seemed to have dimmed. "Your Highness," the guard called out, his voice gentle but firm. "Are you all right?" The prince didn't respond immediately. He kept walking, though his steps were shaky. His expression was one of confusion, but there was also a clear sense of distress. The guard stepped forward, his concern growing as he reached the prince. He tried again, this time placing a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder, hoping to get his attention. Louis looked up, his eyes wide with fear. For a moment he seemed to recognize the guard, but it was clear that something was wrong. He took a shaky breath before collapsing into the guard's arms, his body trembling. "Prince Louis?" the guard asked, his voice full of concern. "What's the matter? What's wrong?" The prince's sobs came first, deep and raw, as though he were holding back something he couldn't control. The guard gently helped him sit against the wall, trying to calm him down. The sounds of his crying echoed through the otherwise quiet hallway, a sound that was both heartbreaking and unfamiliar. Between gasps for air, Prince Louis managed to speak. His words came in broken fragments, as though the weight of what he was trying to say was too much to bear. He did this to me," the prince whispered, his voice barely above a whisper. "He did this to me." The guard froze, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend what the prince had just said. He looked around, searching for any signs of danger. Who had done this to the young prince? Why was he so distressed? The guard's training kicked in, and he immediately scanned the hallway for any threat, but there was nothing. The prince's words hung in the air, their meaning unclear but filled with terror. The guard's heart raced as he realized that something serious had happened, something that required immediate attention. This wasn't just a simple accident or a misunderstanding. The prince was in some kind of danger, and the guard needed to act fast. "Who did this to you, Your Highness?" the guard asked softly, trying to keep his voice steady, even though his mind was reeling. "Tell me who it was, we can help you." The prince shook his head, tears streaming down his face. He seemed too overwhelmed to speak further. His body was trembling, his hands shaking as they gripped the guard's sleeve. The guard, now more determined than ever to get to the bottom of this, quickly made a decision. He had to act quickly, the prince needed help, and he couldn't waste any more time. The guard stood up, gently supporting the prince as he rose to his feet. His mind raced, wondering who could have caused the prince such distress. Was it someone from outside the palace, a threat to the royal family? The possibilities were endless, and each one was more frightening than the last. Without wasting another second, the guard shouted for assistance. He called for backup, and within moments more palace staff appeared, including a few of the royal family's closest aides. The royal family had always been protective of their children, and the alarm was sounded quickly, echoing through the halls of the palace. The panic spread as news of the prince's distress reached the royal family. They were informed that the young prince had been found crying and unable to explain the cause of his distress. It wasn't just a minor incident. Something terrible had occurred, and they needed to know what it was, and fast. As the royal family rushed to the scene, their hearts filled with worry. What had happened to their beloved son? The confusion and fear in the air grew palpable as the palace staff began to piece together what had happened. Prince Louis was still too shaken to speak in detail, but everyone knew that something had gone terribly wrong. The royal family immediately began their own investigation. They questioned the staff, demanding to know if anyone had seen anything unusual. Had anyone been acting strangely? Had anyone been near Prince Louis without the proper clearance? The answers were sparse. Everyone seemed to be as confused and concerned as the royal family. No one had seen anything out of the ordinary. The tension in the palace was thick, and no one knew what to do next. The royal family was determined to get to the bottom of it, but as they waited for answers, the reality of the situation settled in. The prince had been harmed by someone, and they had no idea who or why. Meanwhile, Prince Louis sat quietly in a private room, surrounded by his parents and a few trusted advisors. He had calmed down somewhat, but the fear in his eyes was still there. He clung to his mother, seeking comfort in her embrace. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who had hurt him? Why had they done it? For the royal family, this was the beginning of a mystery that would shake them to their core. The calm, peaceful life they had always known was no longer certain. The palace, once a symbol of safety and protection, had become a place of fear and uncertainty. The atmosphere in the royal palace was tense, filled with whispers and anxious glances. The panic that had rippled through the halls only moments earlier had left an unsettling silence in its wake. Prince Louis, still struggling to compose himself, sat in a private room surrounded by his parents and trusted aides. The walls seemed to close in on him, heavy with the pressure of what had happened, yet no one knew exactly what had transpired. His mother, the queen, held him close, gently brushing back his hair as she tried to comfort him. She knew something terrible had occurred, but like everyone else, she was left in the dark. Her heart broke to see her youngest son in such a state, so vulnerable and frightened. Her mind raced, seeking answers she couldn't find. What could have happened to cause him so much distress? Prince Louis was too shaken to offer any clear explanation. His words were fragmented, and every time he tried to speak, his voice faltered, caught somewhere between fear and confusion. His family tried to console him, but the more they asked, the less he seemed able to articulate. The words he had spoken earlier, "He did this to me," were haunting, echoing in their minds, but they led to more questions than answers. Outside the room, the palace staff had begun to work quickly. The royal guard who had first found Prince Louis was now speaking with other members of the security team, explaining what had happened. His heart was still racing, knowing that the prince had been so deeply distressed and had pointed to someone as the cause. But who? And why? The guard's mind was filled with uncertainty. He had always believed that the palace was a place of safety and order, but now all of that was in question. The investigation began in earnest. Palace staff were questioned, one by one, as everyone tried to piece together what had gone wrong. They searched through the halls looking for any sign of an intruder, any clue that might suggest what had happened. But the palace was as it always was, quiet, orderly, and as far as they could see, untouched. In the midst of all the commotion, the royal family tried to maintain a sense of calm, but it was clear that the fear in their hearts was growing with every passing moment. They knew they needed answers, and fast. The queen insisted on speaking with her son once more, hoping that perhaps he could recall more details now that some time had passed. She gently sat beside him, her voice soft and reassuring as she asked, "Louis, sweetheart, can you tell me who hurt you? Can you tell me what happened?" The prince's eyes, which had been filled with tears not long ago, began to well up again. He shook his head, unable to speak at first. His hands fidgeted in his lap as if he were trying to grasp at the fleeting memories in his mind. His mother held his hand tightly, offering him the support he needed, but the fear in his eyes remained. It was as if the memory was too painful to fully confront. I don't know," he whispered, his voice trembling. I don't know what happened." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to make sense of the confusion that had overwhelmed him. His mother nodded, not pushing him further, but quietly signaling for the royal physician to come in and check on him. She knew that her son's distress could have physical consequences, and she wanted to ensure his safety, both mentally and physically. Meanwhile, the royal guard who had sounded the alarm had been tasked with a critical responsibility. He was asked to gather any information that could provide a lead. As the guard spoke with more members of the staff, he discovered that nothing unusual had happened in the palace that day, at least not at first glance. There had been no suspicious visitors, no strange activity. Everything had been as it always was. The prince had been alone for only a brief time, but it was long enough for something to happen. The guard's mind raced with the possibilities. Who could have done something like this to the prince? Who could have caused so much harm in such a short amount of time? He thought back to the last few hours, retracing the steps of the royal staff, trying to remember anything out of the ordinary. But all the guards were accounted for, and the staff had done their usual work. Everything seemed normal, or at least as normal as it could be in a place like the palace. In another part of the palace, Prince Louis' parents sat with the royal advisors, discussing what could be done next. The advisors were deeply concerned, and some even suggested increasing security, fearing that someone had gained access to the palace in a way that had gone unnoticed. The queen, however, was determined to get to the bottom of the situation in a way that preserved the dignity and safety of her family. "We cannot jump to conclusions," the queen said firmly, her voice steady despite the worry in her heart. "We need to investigate, but we must be careful. We do not want to cause unnecessary panic or make false accusations. Let us first ensure that our son is safe and healthy." The king, standing beside her, nodded in agreement. He, too, was troubled by the situation, but he understood the importance of careful action. They both knew that the safety of their family was paramount, but they also knew that their public image was critical. A scandal of this nature could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Back in the private room, Prince Louis had calmed down a bit more, though his mind was still clouded with confusion. He could remember flashes of the event, but they were scattered and unclear. He could recall feeling an overwhelming sense of fear, but the specifics eluded him. He had been in a place he had never seen before, a place that now seemed both distant and frightening in his memory. As the night wore on, the royal family continued to gather information, hoping that each new piece of the puzzle would lead them closer to understanding what had happened. Yet the answers remained elusive. No one had seen anything unusual. The palace staff, ever loyal, had not noticed any disruptions. The family's private investigators were brought in to look into every possible angle, including surveillance footage and interviews with the staff. The search for answers was relentless, but for now all they had were questions. The queen sat by her son's side, speaking softly to him, reassuring him that they would get to the bottom of this, that he would be safe. Prince Louis, though still shaken, found comfort in his mother's words. Despite the confusion, despite the fear, he knew his family would protect him. He trusted them, and for the first time since the incident, he felt the weight of the palace's security and love around him. But deep down, the unsettling truth remained. Someone had hurt him, and the palace was not the safe, invulnerable place it had always been. Something had changed that day, and it was only a matter of time before the truth was revealed. The investigation into what happened to Prince Louis was in full swing, yet answers remained frustratingly out of reach. The palace, once a symbol of peace and security, now felt like a place full of hidden dangers. Every corner seemed to hold a new question, and every step the royal family took seemed to lead them deeper into uncertainty. Prince Louis, though no longer in immediate physical danger, was still affected by the events. He had spent the previous night resting, trying to recover from the shock and emotional strain, but it was clear that the boy was not yet at ease. His parents, the queen and king, sat by his side most of the time, offering him comfort and support. His older siblings, too, tried to keep him company, though they were as confused and frightened as anyone else. Despite their efforts, the prince could not shake the sense of unease that clung to him. His dreams were troubled, filled with fragmented memories of a place he could not identify and faces he could not remember. The terror he had felt in those moments continued to haunt him, and it was evident in his eyes. a kind of sadness and confusion that no one knew how to ease. The royal family, though deeply concerned for their son, knew they had to find answers. They could not allow this incident to go unresolved. It wasn't just the safety of Prince Louis that was at stake. The very trust that the public had in their royal family depended on how well they handled this situation. If it was revealed that something had gone terribly wrong within the palace walls, it would be a blow to their image, something they could not afford. The king, who had always been a pillar of strength for his family, found himself pacing the length of his study. His mind was in overdrive, searching for any possible explanation for what had happened. The prince's words, "He did this to me," repeated in his mind like a drumbeat. Who could have caused such distress to his son? Why would anyone do something like this in the royal household? As the king paced, he thought about the palace staff. They were loyal, hardworking, and had been with the family for years. But could someone among them have done something to harm Prince Louis? He tried to dismiss the thought, but the idea lingered. The Queen had asked every staff member if they had seen anything unusual, and no one had come forward with any useful information. Everyone seemed as shocked and confused as the royal family themselves. The investigation continued, with a special team of detectives and palace security working tirelessly to piece together the details. They began by going through the surveillance footage from the cameras placed around the palace. Every hallway, every room, every entrance was reviewed meticulously, but it was to no avail. The footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. Prince Louis had been alone for a short period of time, but there was no sign of anyone entering or leaving the areas where he had been. The search felt endless, with each lead proving fruitless. It was then that the royal family decided to turn to the most unlikely source for answers, Prince Louis himself. He had been so distraught when the incident happened, and his memory of the event was fragmented. But perhaps with some time and careful prompting, he could recall something important, something they had missed before. The Queen knew her son's heart better than anyone. She knew that if she could reach him in the right way, he might be able to share something that would shed light on the situation. One quiet evening after dinner, the Queen sat with Prince Louis in his private study. The room was warm and inviting, filled with the soft glow of candlelight and the smell of fresh flowers in vases nearby. Louis had grown quieter in the days following the incident, but his mother had noticed something different tonight. His shoulders were not as tense, and there was a sense of calm in his eyes that had been absent before. She saw an opportunity to talk to him, to try again. "Louis," the Queen said softly, her voice filled with warmth and love, "I know you're still scared. And I know it's hard to talk about what happened, but we're here for you, my dear. We just want to understand. We want to help you." Prince Louis looked up at his mother, his eyes still carrying the weight of his fears. For a moment, he said nothing. But then his voice, though soft, was steady when he spoke. I remember being somewhere else," he began, his words slow and uncertain. "It was a room, but it didn't look like any room I've ever seen in the palace. It was dark and there was someone there. I don't know who they were, but I felt so scared, Mother, so alone." The Queen's heart broke as she listened to her son. He had never been this vulnerable before, and it was clear that whatever had happened had shaken him to his core. She took his hand gently in hers, giving him the space to continue. "Did this person hurt you?" she asked softly. Louis nodded, but then quickly added, "I don't think they meant to hurt me, but I don't know, it felt wrong. I felt trapped. And then I was back in the hallway, and the guard found me, but I don't remember how I got there." The Queen listened intently, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what Louis had said. The prince's memory was still hazy, but it was becoming clearer that whatever had happened, it wasn't just an accident. There was someone or something that had caused him distress, and now it was up to them to figure out who or what that was. Louis grew quiet again, his eyes searching the room as though looking for something to make sense of it all. "It felt like a dream," he whispered, "but it wasn't a dream, it was real. I know it was real." The Queen hugged him close, her heart aching for her son. She had hoped for more clarity, but the words he spoke only deepened the mystery. Who was this figure in his memory, and why was Louis, of all people, targeted? Later that evening, the king joined the Queen and Louis. The conversation was brief, but filled with an urgency that only grew with each passing hour. The royal family agreed that something had to be done, but they knew they couldn't rush the process. The mystery of the prince's ordeal required careful consideration, not just quick action. The trust of the people depended on it, and the family knew that any misstep could have disastrous consequences. As the night wore on, the palace felt strangely quiet. The once bustling halls were now eerily still. Staff went about their duties with quiet efficiency, their eyes occasionally flicking nervously toward the royal wing. No one knew what had happened to Prince Louis, but they all felt the tension in the air. The search for answers would continue. But for now, the royal family would need to rely on the one person who might hold the key to everything, Prince Louis himself. And they hoped that, as the days passed, his memory would become clearer, and the truth would finally be revealed. The days following Prince Louis's distressing experience were filled with more questions than answers. The royal family was still reeling from the shock, and although they had been trying their best to hold it together, the uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The investigation had not provided the clarity they had hoped for. Every lead seemed to go cold, every path they tried to follow leading them in circles. But the royal family knew they couldn't stop now, they couldn't afford to. Their son had been shaken by something, and they needed to uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. In the days that followed, there were moments when Prince Louis seemed to improve. The anxiety that had gripped him in the beginning began to ease, if only slightly. He was once again eating his meals and spending time with his siblings, though there remained a subtle tension in the air whenever he was around. He didn't speak much about the incident anymore, but his family knew that the fear still lingered just beneath the surface. One evening, the king and queen decided to take matters into their own hands. They had consulted with experts, hired private investigators, and questioned every member of the palace staff. But none of that had brought them closer to the truth. It was time for them to confront the situation head-on, to look beyond the formalities and the bureaucracy. They had to dig deeper into their son's experience and try to understand what had happened. The king, with his usual calm authority, made a decision that would change the course of the investigation. He requested that a private meeting be held with the head of security, the royal physicians, and a few trusted advisors. The goal was to discuss everything they had learned so far, and more importantly, to reassess their approach to the problem. They needed to come up with a new strategy, one that might finally bring them the answers they so desperately sought. As the family sat in their private study that evening, the tension in the room was palpable. The king and queen sat at the head of the table, flanked by a few of their closest aides. Prince Louis, although invited, had chosen not to attend. He was still processing everything, and his parents didn't want to pressure him further. This meeting was for the adults. It was time to take action. The head of security, a seasoned professional who had been with the royal family for many years, began the discussion. "Your Majesties," he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "We've gone through every inch of the palace, reviewed every piece of footage, and questioned all the staff. There's no sign of an intruder, no indication that anyone has gained access to the royal quarters in an unusual way. But there's something we may have overlooked." The king and queen exchanged a glance. They had heard similar things before, but this time there was a sense of urgency in the head of security's tone. What had they missed? "We've been focusing so much on external threats, on possible intruders," the head of security continued. "But perhaps we should also consider the possibility that the situation may have involved someone already within the palace walls. Someone the prince trusted, someone close." The words hit the king and queen like a shockwave. The idea that one of their own staff, someone they had trusted for years, could be involved in such an incident was unthinkable. But as the head of security continued speaking, the royal family began to realize that this might be the only explanation left. "It's possible," the head of security said, "that someone in the palace, whether a staff member or someone who had access to the prince's location, may have influenced him in some way, even if unintentionally. The prince's memories are still unclear, but he keeps mentioning feeling trapped, like he was in a place he didn't recognize." The king and queen listened intently, their minds racing. Could someone they trusted have done this? It was hard to imagine. But they couldn't ignore the possibility. They had to look at every angle, no matter how difficult it was to confront. The meeting went on for hours as they discussed their options. The royal physicians weighed in, suggesting that the prince might be suffering from the psychological effects of a traumatic event. His memories were still fragmented, and it was possible that he had been too scared to recall everything clearly. The family agreed to continue working with the prince's therapists, hoping that in time he might be able to piece together the details of what had happened. As the meeting drew to a close, the king stood and addressed his family and advisors. "We will continue to search for answers," he said firmly. "We will not rest until we know the truth, but we must remember that our priority is Louis's well-being. We will protect him no matter what." The queen nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We will not let fear control us," she added. "We will find the answers, and we will stand together as a family." The king and queen knew they couldn't go on much longer in this state of uncertainty. They needed to find closure for themselves, and more importantly, for Prince Louis. The stress had been taking its toll on everyone, but especially on their son. The fear that had been instilled in him wasn't something that would disappear easily. It would take time, patience, and understanding. Meanwhile, as the investigation continued, one of the palace aides came forward with something unexpected. A small detail, one that had been overlooked before, caught their attention. A maid who had been working in the royal wing the day of the incident reported seeing something unusual. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now that the investigation had intensified, she realized that it could be important. "I saw someone," the maid said hesitantly, "walking in the hall near where the prince was found. I didn't think it was strange at first, but now that you mention it." The person was wearing a cloak and their face was partially covered. I couldn't see who it was. The king and queen's hearts skipped a beat. This was the first real lead they had gotten in days, a cloaked figure. Could it be someone from the palace, or perhaps someone else entirely? The investigation team immediately sprang into action. They went back to the footage they had reviewed and searched the surrounding areas, hoping to find any trace of the mysterious figure. They questioned the maid further, trying to gather more details. But the maid's memory of the event was vague. She couldn't recall much more than what she had already said. The figure had been there, but the details were blurry. As the investigation unfolded, the royal family knew they were getting closer to the truth. But there were still many unanswered questions. Who was the cloaked figure? What had they wanted? And most importantly, why had they chosen Prince Louis as their target? The palace felt more tense than ever before. The royal family was on edge, but they were also determined. They would not let this incident define them. They would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. They were a family, and nothing would tear them apart. But with each passing day, the mystery deepened. The truth was out there somewhere, and it was only a matter of time before it was finally uncovered.